For economics, we've talked about a number of different factors and elements. We've talked about the 4 factors of production: natural resources, capital goods, human capital, and entrepreneurs. We've also talked about the 4 economic systems, which are traditional, market, mixed, and command. And this video is going to focus on trade and free trade, as well as some trade restrictions that can take place in a country. So voluntary free trade is trade with no trade barriers or no restrictions. So there is nothing that prevents someone from trading. In short, individuals, which are private businesses, can make their economic decisions without any government interference. So they can decide to trade or not trade based on their needs and what they're making and what their people desire. One of the big advantages of voluntary free trade is you typically see an increase in GDP and your GDP growth rate. So because there are so much, it increases trade, because if you don't restrict trade, you trade more, and it keeps the prices down because of competition, so you typically see more people buying. So free trade really does help GDP, and it increases growth rate. That's one of the big advantages. The other thing it enables you to do is you can concentrate, in countries and businesses can concentrate on something that they do best, which is specialization. They don't have to worry about protecting different companies, and they have an equal advantage to compete freely with somebody else, and they tend to do things that and specialize in areas that they do best. Okay? Trade involves the exchange of goods and services between countries. With exports, exports are, again, like the word sounds like, goods and services are sold to countries, so it's exiting the country. Imports are the goods and services bought, so you're buying products from other countries. And basically, it's like the word sounds, it's instead of it sounds like it's coming into a country. So exports are going out, it's what you're selling to other countries, that's how you make your money. Imports are what you're buying from other countries. So again, exports are the goods and services sold to another country, it's how we make our money, and imports are what we're buying from another country. So let's look at free trade versus trade barriers. Again, free trade, nothing prevents trade, and you're free to trade with who you want. Again, one of the big advantages, it allows companies to compete and lower the prices on goods. It keeps competition. If you're competing, you tend to lower your prices to keep up with a competitive company, and it allows the prices to stay low so people are buying more. Countries typically have a higher GDP, and there's a higher standard of living. With trade barriers, it is basically something that prevents trade or blocks trade. One of the big advantages for using trade barriers is it prevents competition. So if free trade is so great, and it's going to increase our GDP, and it's going to increase economic growth, why in the world would we want to use a trade barrier? Well, there's some reasons. If you are having a company that is trying to compete with a foreign company that's outside your borders, and they have a lot lower prices than you do, and you're in the United States and you're trying to protect that infant industry, then you're going to put a trade barrier up to protect not only the workers' jobs, but you also are trying to protect that infant company from not going out of business. Trade barriers protect those local businesses from foreign competition. So sometimes it has some advantages to put a trade barrier up, especially for businesses that are just getting going and they're just starting, some of the upstarts, so that you can protect them from foreign cheap competition that can come in and undercut the price, because people are going to buy what is cheaper for them. It also can protect sometimes consumers from dangerous products. So let's say you've got a country that does not have good safety standards. Sometimes you'll put a trade barrier in place, a country will, to protect its consumers. So let's say that there's a country in the world that uses lead paint on toys. Well, obviously that's not a good combination because lead paint can cause damage to small children. So we might put a trade barrier in place to protect our children and our consumers. There's 3 different types of trade barriers. There's a tariff, a quota, and an embargo. Tariff is the least restrictive. Just like the first 2 letters sound like tax, it is a tax. It's a tax on imported goods. Okay, so here's how it works. When let's say Japan is importing goods into the United States, the United States will put a tax on that product, but guess who pays for that tax? It's not Japan, it's you. You, the consumer, pay on that tax. So oftentimes a tariff is the consumer paying in the form of a higher price, because what happens is once you put a tariff in place, it raises the price of goods, and so the prices rise, and that prevents you from wanting to buy a foreign product. But if you do want to buy that foreign product because maybe it's a better quality, you're going to pay the tariff. So that's how kind of a tariff works. Quota. And the government does make the money on a tariff, so it does have some advantages in terms of generating income. Quota. Quota is a limit on the amount of goods that are imported. Okay? So let's say you're importing 100,000 cars of a certain product from Japan. Instead of importing 100,000 cars, let's say the United States wants to limit that to, let's say, 50,000. Okay, so 50,000 limits the quantity. Again, now it's becoming a more scarce resource. You're limiting the amount coming into a country, so there aren't that many of that type of a car. So the demand goes up because you've got a short supply or a limited supply, and that will raise the price. So both a tariff and a quota, in essence, raise the price of a product. Okay? They do it in different ways. Tariff, you're just putting a tax right on top of the product. So out the door, it's going to be more money because there's a tariff on it. A quota is limiting the amount that's coming in, so it creates some scarcity, a shorter supply of a product, which will increase the price due to supply and demand, and that will also raise the price of a foreign good. And finally, the last trade barrier is embargo. An embargo is a complete ban on trading, and usually it's for all trading, but sometimes it's just for one product. An embargo is typically used if you disagree with a country for political reasons. So, for example, let's say you don't like that it's a communist country. You don't trade with that particular country. You put an embargo on them. For example, what we did with Cuba. We have an embargo on Cuba. That may change. We've done some current events last year where some of those trade policies may be lifted, but right now we have an embargo on Cuba and we don't trade with them. So that limits our trading completely with that country. Sometimes countries get together and because they don't like a policy, maybe it's a human rights issue and there's segregating certain ethnic groups or minority groups, countries will band together and use an embargo. Nothing more powerful than hurting a country where it hurts the most in their pocketbook. Citizens become very unhappy when they don't have money. So that's a great way, using an embargo is a great way to force a country to change its policies that you don't agree with. So most often embargoes are used because of a political reason. Okay, so what happens again with a tariff? The price of a product with a tariff, it goes up. Okay, why is it used? It's used to make the product more expensive. Quota, again, it raises the price of a good because you're limiting the amount coming in. Again, that's sort of a math idea. You limit the supply, less products come in, which raise the price. The harshest trade barrier is an embargo. Again, it's used for political purposes to hurt an economy of a country. It forces that country to change. And it undermines the leader in charge because people are very, very unhappy when they are poor. You get riots, you get unrest, And oftentimes it forces the leader or the government in charge to change something. Okay, oftentimes an embargo is used and enforced by the military. Okay, that ends our review for trade.